Funny thing about control, everyone wants it until they realize what it costs. The silence in that room wasn't peace. It was judgment. Eyes locked, breath held. The kind of silence that doesn't just listen, it accuses. You can feel it crawling on your skin, like whispers trying to pull you apart. But you don't flinch. You let the silence speak. You let it tremble before you're calm. Because that's the moment you learn power isn't noise. Power is restraint. They thought they could rattle you, thought their words could crack you open. But you didn't fight them with anger. You fought them with stillness. That's what broke them. They couldn't read your face, couldn't predict your next move. You became the storm they couldn't map, the chaos they couldn't reason with. Every pause you took was a verdict. Every breath, a warning. That's when they started to fall apart, and you hadn't even raised your voice yet. See, people don't fear being wrong. They fear being outclassed. You didn't destroy them with proof. You destroyed them with presence. They saw it in your eyes. The calm of someone who's been through hell and came back fluent in its language. You weren't defending yourself, you were exposing their weakness. The courtroom wasn't about law anymore. It was about dominance, and you owned it without saying a word. Ever noticed how quiet people scare the loud ones? It's because silence carries weight. It forces truth to surface. You didn't need to shout to be heard. Every word you spoke cut deeper because you waited until it mattered. That's the difference between those who speak and those who command. The ones who survive the trial aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who listen, learn, and then deliver the final blow, softly. You didn't just win that day. You rewrote the rhythm of the room. They came with arguments. You came with aura, and that's why they quit. Because they realized something terrifying. You weren't playing the game. You were the game. And once they saw that, even the lawyers quit. Doubt. It's a funny thing, it doesn't knock. It crawls in quietly, whispering that maybe, just maybe, you're not enough. It shows up before every big moment, every fight worth bleeding for. And most people, they let it win, they shrink. They fade. But not you. You stared doubt in the face and smiled like it was an old friend. Because you learned something they never did. Doubt isn't your enemy. It's the fuel that turns hesitation into power. You remember that moment, don't you? The smirks, the side eyes, the quiet disrespect wrapped in polite tones. They didn't think you could stand your ground. They mistook calm for weakness, silence for surrender. But deep down you were calculating, breathing, waiting for the perfect crack in their confidence. Every insult became oxygen. Every laugh became ignition. And before they knew it, your composure was the wildfire they couldn't contain. People think fire destroys. They forget it also purifies. You burned through their arrogance, not with rage, but with precision. Every sentence you spoke stripped away another layer of their illusion. They saw confidence, but what they really witnessed was control under pressure. The kind of control that makes power look effortless. That's the part they'll never understand, how calm can be louder than fury. Doubt used to haunt you. Now it follows you like a shadow you've trained. You don't silence it anymore, you use. Every question it asks becomes another reason to rise. Every fear it throws at you becomes another test you pass. You stopped running from the noise inside your head and turned it into rhythm. The rhythm of someone who's done being underestimated. And that's when the shift happened. The same voices that once doubted you started echoing your words. The same faces that dismissed you started studying you. Doubt didn't disappear, it bowed. It learned who it belonged to. Because once you master your fear, once you make peace with your chaos, you stop fighting for validation. You start moving like someone who doesn't need it. There's a kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it dominates. The kind that makes others restless, makes them talk just to fill the void you create. You discovered that silence is not weakness, it's presence. When you stopped explaining yourself, they started explaining you. Every word they threw bounced off, because your quiet said more than their noise ever could. That's the kind of silence that shakes confidence. It demands respect without asking. You didn't interrupt, you didn't react, you just watched, and that made them crumble. Because when someone can't read your face, they start fighting their own mind. They begin to reveal what they tried to hide. That's the magic of composure. It turns time into a weapon. The longer you wait, the louder their insecurities become. And you sit back and let the truth unwrap itself, one mistake at a time. Most people underestimate how heavy silence can be. But you've carried it, you've used it. You've learned that sometimes the loudest victories are the ones where you don't say a thing. You let the atmosphere you let tension do the talking. And that's when real power enters the room. Not through words, but through aura. Your calm became a mirror, showing them everything they tried to hide behind noise. They called it arrogance, but it was focus. They called it cold, but it was discipline. You weren't ignoring them, you were dissecting them. Every twitch, every blink, every forced smile, you read it all. Silence made you dangerous because it made you observant. You didn't need to control the room. You were every heartbeat in that space followed your rhythm, whether they knew it or not. And that's what breaks people. Not the words you speak, but the quiet that follows. The kind of quiet that lingers after truth lands. You don't silence others with authority. You silence them with certainty. Because once they feel you're calm, once they realize you're not reacting to their chaos, they know they've already lost. The real battle was never in that room. It was inside your head. Every argument, every accusation, every flicker of doubt, they weren't against you. They were within you. That's where the real trial took place. The voices of hesitation, the echoes of failure, the shadows of your own expectations, they all stood before your inner judge. And you had to decide, are you the defendant or the executioner of your own limit? You learned fast. Control doesn't come from silencing thoughts. It comes from mastering them. Your mind used to be chaos, noise, confusion. But somewhere between pressure and pain, you found rhythm in the madness. You didn't try to escape the noise, you learned to conduct, like an orchestra of storms. Every fear became a note, every memory a reminder. And suddenly, the chaos started to sound like clarity. Most people never understand how loud the mind gets when the world goes quiet. But you faced that silence head on. You let it question you, break you, shape you. You realized strength isn't the absence of fear, it's walking with it, step by step until it can't keep up anymore. That's the secret few ever learn. The mind doesn't destroy you. It tests you. It asks if you're worthy of leading yourself. When you walked into that courtroom, it wasn't about them anymore. You weren't trying to prove anyone wrong. You were proving to your own mind that it could no longer control you. Every statement they made, every doubt they whispered, it only mirrored what you'd already conquered with it. You weren't defending your name, you were defending your evolution. And that's when power shifted. They thought they were watching a trial, but what they really witnessed was resurrection. The moment your thoughts bowed to your will, the moment the noise became silent, the moment the courtroom inside your mind finally fell in order, and you became the judge of your own destiny. They thought power was about volume, about being seen, about standing taller than the rest. But real intelligence, it doesn't roar, it observes, it strikes when the world blinks. You learned that knowledge without control is chaos, and control without knowledge is emptiness. But together, they're lethal. That's what scared them. Not your words, not your tone, but your precision. You didn't talk to win, you talked to end. There's a beauty in patience that few understand. The longer you waited, the more they revealed. Every argument became a map. Every sentence exposed a weakness. You didn't fight back with emotion. You countered with logic, wrapped in confidence. Your calm dismantled their structure. piece by piece. It wasn't luck, it was calculation, the kind of mental chess only those who've suffered long enough can play flawlessly. You realized intelligence isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing yourself. You knew what to say, what to leave unsaid, when to breathe, and when to let silence do the speaking. You made them think they were winning while you rewired the whole game beneath their feet. That's what true mastery looks like. Not control over others, but control over the battlefield they never saw coming. Most people use knowledge to sound superior. You used it to make impact. Your words didn't echo, they pierced. Every phrase landed like a sentence they couldn't appeal. You didn't argue for attention. You delivered truth so sharp it left them breathless. And that's what brilliance looks like. Quiet, intentional, unapologetic. It doesn't seek validation, it seeks precision. When intelligence becomes a weapon, you stop playing by their rules. You start writing your own. You stop reacting to their chaos and start predicting it. You don't chase advantage, you become it. And that's when you know you've won. Not when they fall silent out of fear, but when they realize too late that your mind had already sealed the verdict, long before the fight even began. It didn't happen with noise, it happened with stillness. That one moment when everything froze, their words, their confidence, their rhythm. You watched it unfold like slow motion. Their eyes gave it away before their voices did. The shake in their tone, the hesitation between sentences, the forced smile trying to hide collapse. That's when you knew they'd broken. And the best part, you hadn't even moved. You didn't need to humiliate them. You didn't need to gloat. You just stood there, anchored, unshaken. Power doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself. When everything else falls apart, you could feel the weight shift in the room. That sudden realization, they weren't in control anymore. You were, and they felt it, not through force, but through the terrifying simplicity of your composure. Every word you spoke landed like a hammer wrapped in silk. No shouting, no chaos, just truth, precise, calm, final. They tried to respond, but truth doesn't argue. It just exists, and that's what broke them. You didn't defeat them with brilliance. You defeated them with presence. The kind of energy that says, I don't need to prove anything. I already am what you're trying to become. That's when fear changed sides. They realized the battle wasn't between them and you. It was between them and their own reflection. You became a mirror they couldn't stand to face. Every weakness they buried came rushing up, clawing for air. That's why they quit. Because it wasn't just a loss. It was exposure. You didn't crush them. You revealed them. And when the silence settled, you didn't smile. You didn't celebrate. You simply breathed. Because victory doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you've proven to yourself, not them, that your calm was never weakness. It was the final form of strength. They came with expectations. You came with certainty. That difference changed everything. They thought this was about proving them wrong. But deep down, you knew it was about proving yourself right. Every glance, every word, every pause built something stronger than a victory. It built a standard, a line in the sand they could never cross. You became the measure they compared themselves against. It's not about breaking them. It's about becoming unbreakable. You didn't fight for respect, you embodied it. Every movement, every breath carried weight. You weren't just in control, you defined the rules. You taught them without saying a thing what dominance looks like. Not by force, but by being something they couldn't imitate, something they couldn't reach. They noticed it first, the shift in the air. The way your presence made everything else fade. They wanted to label it arrogance. You called it mastery, because mastery isn't loud. It's steady. It's a quiet certainty that doesn't need applause. That's what made you dangerous. Not your argument, not your skill, but the unshakable reality that you had become the standard. Power isn't given. It's recognized, and once they recognized it in you, the game changed. They stopped debating your words. They started studying your silence. They stopped trying to beat you. They started trying to understand you. That's when the balance shifted. When you were no longer a player in their world, but the benchmark they feared they could never reach. And in that moment, you weren't fighting for victory. You were defining it. You were rewriting what it meant to stand in a courtroom, in a life, in a moment. You became proof that dominance isn't taken in noise. It's carved in presence. And once carved, it becomes impossible to erase. After the storm, there's a silence heavier than any noise. That silence doesn't scream victory. It whispers truth. They stopped speaking not because they had no words, but because they had no ground to stand on. You didn't need to raise your voice to break them. You let the quiet speak for you, and it told them everything they feared to hear. You could feel it in the air, the shift, the way their confidence shrank under your gaze, the way their arguments withered before they even finished. It wasn't chaos that defeated them. It was your stillness, your ability to stand firm when every force tried to shake you. That quiet strength became a verdict, not written, not spoken, but felt, deep, and irreversible. Most victories are loud. They parade themselves. But yours came in subtlety, in the way you walked out of that room untouched by their noise, in the way you carried yourself after proving that dominance isn't in destruction, it's in endurance. They quit because they realized they could no longer fight something they couldn't define, something that had become bigger than them. That's what victory feels like when it's done right. Not celebration, not applause, but quiet dominance. They leave the room defeated, not because they lost the argument, but because they lost the battlefield they never even realized existed. You didn't destroy them with force. You dissolved them with certainty, and silence sealed the outcome. The courtroom became more than a place of law. It became a monument to your control, a reminder that battles aren't always won by power shown. They're won by power felt. And once silence owns a room, it becomes the loudest truth of all. Power doesn't corrupt. Power exposes. It strips away illusions until nothing remains but raw truth. They came armed with arguments. You came armed with yourself. And in that exposure, they lost more than a case. They lost certainty. They lost control. They lost the belief that they knew what dominance looked like. You taught them something deeper, something permanent. The truth is uncomfortable. It unsettles. It pulls at the foundations people build their confidence on. And you became the mirror they couldn't look into without flinching. You showed them strength without aggression, victory without noise, control without chaos. That's the lesson they'll never admit. They lost because they were afraid to face themselves. There's a cruelty in that lesson, but it's also beauty, because it's proof that strength isn't given, it's earned. And when earned in silence and certainty, it becomes unshakable. That's why they quit. Not because they were weaker, but because they saw strength they couldn't imitate. They saw a standard they couldn't meet. And that's a defeat far deeper than any trial. You walk away changed. They walk away exposed. The lesson doesn't end when the doors close. It lingers. It seeps into thought. It shapes futures. And that's why every trial, every challenge, becomes a proving ground. Not for them, for you. Because mastery isn't about proving the world wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And in that proving, you become something they can't erase, something they can't undo. A force, a presence, a standard. you learn the final truth of power. It doesn't just win, it transforms. And once transformed, there is no going back. The trial ended, but you didn't leave that room the same. You walked out remade, not because you won, but because you became someone they could no longer touch. They saw the victory. You felt the transformation. The silence after battle isn't emptiness. It's rebirth. It's the moment you realize the war was never theirs to win. It was yours to master. Control is not taking, it's becoming. You didn't seize power that day. You embodied it. Every step you took afterward was proof that dominance isn't loud declarations. It's quiet authority. The battlefield was not the courtroom. The battlefield was your mind. And once you mastered that, every war becomes yours to win. You know now what it means to stand unshaken. Not because nothing tries to break you, but because you've learned to rise each time it does. You've learned to turn every trial into a forge, every doubt into steel, every moment of silence into a throne. And that is rebirth. That is control. That is the art of becoming unstoppable. They left the room broken. You left it whole. They left with questions. You left with answers. They left trying to understand you. You left knowing there was nothing left to prove. That's the power of transformation, when victory is no longer measured in outcomes, but in who you become through the trial. In the final truth, the trial never ends. Every moment is a test. Every silence is a verdict. Every step forward is proof that you've mastered the art of control, that you've risen above, that you have become the standard, and that standard will never be broken.